Welcome to BIZTALK'22, an interview series organized by the Commerce Society of Royal College, where we have an insightful chat with a highlighted business personality. So ladies and gentlemen, our speaker joining with us today is having a distinguished career in corporate affairs management, including consistent pitching of major news angles to business media, and also having dynamically contributed to strengthening a major national payment network in Sri Lanka. He is an honours degree holder in electrical and computer engineering from the State University of New York, USA, specialized in data communication, and MBA from the Postgraduate Institute of Management, and last but not least, he is a proud alumnus of Royal College. He is none other than Mr.Channa De Silva, the Chief Executive Officer of LankaClear, which operates the LankaPay National Payment Network in Sri Lanka. Hello, Mr. De Silva, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much for inviting. I'm happy to associate with Royal College.
It is with great pleasure that we welcome you today, and many thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So, Mr. De Silva, getting into our discussion today, you are the operator of Sri Lanka's national payment network, LankaPay. So, can you give us an insight on how it contributes to the financial ecosystem of the country?
Yeah, so actually what happens is we have been having banks and finance companies for a long time, several decades. But however, when we look at how people have access to their financial services, it was more of a manual. I mean, you had to sort of visit a bank before 3 o'clock on a weekday if you have to do a financial transaction. But with the digitization of the world, the world was moving more towards having access to financial services through digital. So how actually LankaClear really started was this was like 20 years ago when checks have been in use for a foreseeable past, and so actually a check when you deposit in a bank, it took more than 7 days to clear. So what happened was central bank took that initiative in 2002 to set up an operation to automate this check clearing process. Where the technology was introduced so that instead of a physical check moving from one location to the other, from a branch to a head office and vice versa, basically it was scanned and an image transfer through a technology was implemented. And in 2006, LankaClear implemented a system called check imaging and truncation, which reduced the clearing cycle to 1 business day from more than 7 days, and basically it sort of benefits everybody, businesses to everybody, so that the clearing cycle reduced. So that's actually how it started to sort of provide more convenience to the general public as well as businesses. But moving forward, what also a central bank and other banks realized was that we need to move into more digital services, where even like the ATM service was introduced by several banks about a decade ago. However, a customer had to visit his or her own bank to the ATM to sort of withdraw cash or do a transaction. And in order to provide further convenience, LankaClear implemented a system where all the ATMs of banks are connected now, so that a customer can go to any bank and sort of withdraw cash or do a transaction. So that was another sort of convenience service that LankaClear provided, and this is applicable countrywide. From every corner of the country you can access to that. Then also moving forward, rather than even visiting a bank, how can you do a financial transaction? That's where the digital transactions came place being. So from a the salary payments of all the government departments as well as in all the private sector basically happens on a particular day of a month, and all the employees are supposed to get salaries, but all those employees have their bank accounts in different banks, where the organization's account may be in one bank. So they do what they call a bulk transfer. So this is actually facilitated through what we call Sri Lanka Interbank Payment System SLIPS, which was introduced by LankaClear Automated in 2009. and subsequently including the connecting the ATMs, and then also in terms of digital payments, where a customer can log into his or her internet banking or mobile banking and do a fund transfer to another bank instantaneously. So this is real-time payments, and this actually can be facilitated through a normal computer or even a mobile phone. So I think this is basically and moving forward, we have seen mobile payments playing a role. So we are trying to move people towards more digital, and the beauty of that is getting these services accessible to not just in Western province but outside Sri Lanka. So in that sense, the whole country is sort of benefiting general public as well as all the organizations, the small to medium businesses from these services. So we feel we have been providing a national service where, especially that was evident during COVID time, where people couldn't even leave their houses. So in that sense, actually LankaClear is providing a vital service behind the scene, because actually for the customers, what is present is their bank, whether it's their banking portal or the ATM, but actually the behind the scene, all the services are provided by LankaPay.
Yeah. So Mr. De Silva, were there any difficulties or challenges you faced when you were building this foundation for LankaClear?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there were many challenges. First of all, actually connecting all the banks took considerable effort, because there was development from a technology perspective from our side as well as bank side. So getting that into place took fair bit of considerable amount of time. Actually, the main switch that we implemented in 2013, it took 4 or 5 years to sort of get it fully operated by getting all the banks and finance companies connected to the network. So that was one challenge. Actually, the biggest challenge what we faced really was getting consumers to adopt some of these services, because actually the simple reason is we want actually to move people into digital as much as possible, but we have been as a country, we have been using cash for the foreseeable future, and people are comfortable in using cash. So moving people away from cash into digital has taken a significant effort, because obviously people really did not have a big issue of using cash, because they were used to it, right? And moving them was more of a behavioral change than actually just moving them for simple reasons like not having access to small money or change money, and that kind of thing was not really a compelling reason. So getting them to adopt some of these services, because banks been having even ATM services, it took more than 5 to 6 years for people to really get adopted, rather than going to a bank and waiting in a queue and withdrawing money. You can just go to ATM or any ATM now and withdraw cash, right? So getting that adoption also took some time. So we have also seen digital having that now. For example, if you really look at the payment cards, a debit card we call, or credit cards, the usage of that, primarily we have seen, people are using that now to go to a ATM and withdraw cash. Actually, the purpose of a card is not that. Really, can you make a payment through that card? So that adoption has been very slow. I would say prior to 2020, it has been absolutely slow, and banks and other organizations have been struggling to get this adopted. So I would say the second biggest challenge was adoption. The third one, I think I would really like to highlight is the biggest challenge is actually the demographics of Sri Lanka, right? We have a 21.5 million population, but if you really look at the demographics, or more than 80% of the people live in rural areas, right? It's less than 20% in urban areas, but especially most of the banks and finance companies have been concentrating in providing their services to Western province, which has less than 20% population. So in terms of when we are talking about financial inclusivity, which is basically taking financial services to rural masses in rural most parts of the country, biggest challenge was actually nobody was really concentrating taking the services there. So that had been a real challenge, but changing the mindset to focus in other areas has been a challenge. But I think slowly but surely we are getting there, because actually the main game changer really had been the use of smartphone, right? So if you really look at the again demographics of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a very healthy mobile phone usage. We have almost 150% of the population if we take the total mobile phones in the market. One person may be having more than one phone or a SIM, right? But if you really look at, almost 50% of that are now getting converted to smartphones. So smartphone based services have been real way of getting to the rural masses. And we are seeing traction because we have seen almost more than 50% people are now accessing internet. Majority of them are through smartphones. And then we are also seeing almost 38%, roughly about more than 8 million people are active social media users, and again majority are using smartphones. So when people are using smartphones for accessing social media and other services, getting them moved to that base into digital is an easier task than getting somebody who doesn't even use technology into digital. So we have seen traction in that segment, but the good news about that segment is actually, again, another statistic in Sri Lanka. We have seen by looking at the ATM usage, more than 65% of the people in Sri Lanka uses their ATMs in local languages, Sinhala and Tamil, right? So what we have seen is the technology, if we are to take to rural, it has to support trilingual, right? And smartphone now actually supports trilingual thanks to technologies implemented by local companies like Bhasha, where the local language keyboards are available. So because of that, we are seeing more and more traction coming from rural parts as well. So that again another challenge solved by the use of technology, by introduction of the smartphone. So these technologies have been available for some time, but I guess the real problem was getting adopted and changing the behavior patterns of people. So those have been real challenges, but I think slowly but surely we are overcoming them.
Yes, Mr. De Silva, thank you for walking us through the foundation of LankaClear and also mentioning the difficulties you faced while building that foundation. Having said that, currently there's a tendency to push towards a cashless society, or another word I can use is a digital economy. What is your opinion on the adaptability of the Sri Lanka's economy for a cashless society, or of course a digital economy?
Yeah, so I think when we look at, there is technology worldwide, right? But every technology does not work in every context, every country, right? I will take a simple example, if you take the mobile money, we call it, this mobile money like Easy Cash or M-Cash services that have been available for some time. Now, what actually happens is a lot of people think that technology, just because it works in another country, will work in our country as well, right? That's not true, because if you really just take the mobile money example, if you take Africa, they introduced a service called M-Pesa, and actually the adoption went through the roof. Large numbers. Actually, there was a very simple reason, because in Africa you don't get banks, you don't get ATMs. So for somebody to even go and withdraw cash, they had to go like 500 miles. Sometimes there are no transport to get that. So access to cash was really a problem for them. So when they introduced M-Pesa, either through smartphones or feature phones, people had now access to their money digitally or electronically through a phone, right? And obviously because of the lack of infrastructure in terms of financial services, people started adopting at a rate. But when you come to Sri Lanka, if you go out of the house, there's an ATM right in front of your house, or less than 5 minutes walk, right? It could be by any bank and an island wide, right? So because of that, people had easy access to cash, right? So getting access to cash was not really a problem in Sri Lanka. So when you introduce technology to say as a solution to that, just like in Africa, it didn't really pick up, because obviously our context was different, right? Because our context, if you really look at our context, in most countries, if you take some of the Asian region, the problem is people don't have bank accounts, what they call unbanked. But in Sri Lanka, if you really look at numbers from 2018-19, as a country we have issued 23 million debit cards. What is our population? 21.5. So we have more debit cards than population, right? So which means one person may have more than one card. So what it means is every debit card is linked to a bank account. So which means we have more than 30 million bank accounts in the country. So we are not an unbanked country, right? I mean that's the difference, right? So pretty much from small days, parents' account, savings account for their children, so people have bank accounts. But the actual real challenge for Sri Lanka has been, even though you have a bank account, you may not be using that bank account. There are a lot of, I mean, if you take the rural, if you take the, I would say the SME base, they actually have been dealing in cash. So for example, a small shop, they sell something and they get cash from the customer. And when they want to buy something, I mean the shop owner, let's say buy vegetables, he or she will take that cash to the Sunday fair or the fair and buy vegetables by using cash. So that cash, even though they have a bank account, that never got deposited in a bank, right? So because of that, it's been a cash-rich country, and this cash has been sitting outside the banking system, right? So that has been a challenge, right? So then what actually also the other part is cashless. Right? So why are we saying cashless, right? So there are inherent economic benefits. Now, for example, to maintain cash in circulation, we actually last central bank publishes a document called Payments Bulletin. We have more than 1 trillion in cash in circulation in the country, right? So the problem of that is a rule of thumb in a region is that way to print, distribute, recycle, cash in circulation and provide security. Because if you have to take cash into a ATM, you have to provide security. So there are a lot of costs involved, right? That cost is equivalent to roughly about 1.5% of GDP in a country, right? So this is the huge volume, because if you really compare that to how much Sri Lanka spent on entire education, including teacher salaries and all that, is less than 3%. So we are wasting 1.5% of GDP to maintain cash, right? So let's say if we are able to move 30% of people to use digital rather than dealing in cash, which means we can reduce the amount of cash in circulation, which means we can maybe, let's say, 0.5% of GDP, which probably can be used for social welfare, samurdhi, or some program to give people some benefit out of that without wasting for using cash. So that there is actually a compelling reason why we should move towards a cashless society. There is definitely an economic benefit, and there are other social benefits why we should move cashless. Now, for example, I said especially these small to medium enterprises, right? When they deal in cash, even though they have a bank account, they don't deposit that money in a bank, right? Let's take a simple example. Somebody like a three-wheeler driver, right? Maybe the three-wheeler guy makes about 50 to 60,000 rupees a month, let's say, right? But this money never goes into a bank account. So when he or she wants to, say, buy a new three-wheeler, he or she needs a loan from a bank. But since the money that he or she earns never hits a bank account, bank doesn't know this guy's income. So even to give a 50,000 or 100,000 loan, bank will refuse, because there is no what we call a credit history. He is not credit worthy to provide a loan, because bank doesn't know this guy can pay back. But imagine if that 50,000-60,000 start going and hitting a bank account, maybe getting deposited money. Maybe over a 6 months period, bank would know, hey, this guy earns 50,000 to 60,000 a month, and consistently over 6 months he or she has earned this. So maybe we can give him 50,000 to 100,000 loan, right? Because he has the ability to pay, right? So then slowly these guys, especially the small to medium enterprises, will start slowly building credit history, and then suddenly. So a real problem, social problem, is they don't have access to credit. Right? They can't get a loan from a bank. Unlike people who are employed, who get a pay salary and the salary goes to the bank, they can get a loan. But this majority, because more than 50% of the Sri Lankan economy is run by SME, small to medium enterprises, right? So it actually a social problem, because right now their option is go to these polymodalalis, loan sharks, and get a loan at a thumping interest, right? I mean, sometimes it's 10% interest a day. Right? And sometimes all these guys, they have to sell their three-wheeler to settle that, because they get stuck, right? So if we can bring them into the formal ecosystem, and then suddenly they start becoming credit worthy, so we are actually addressing a social problem. Because right now some people even commit suicide because they can't settle their loans, especially to this informal sector we call the polymodalalis, right? So we are actually also by helping them by helping to overcome a social problem of having access to credit by moving cashless. So there are definitely inherent benefits of moving. So now, I mean, that's sort of the message that we have been taking into market, saying it's not, moving digital has benefits from a personal perspective, maybe convenience and other aspects, as well as there's economic benefits to the country, right? So that is why we really need to move cashless, not because every other country is moving cashless, we have to follow that. There is significant benefit coming into the population, the citizens, as well as general public, especially looking at the small to medium enterprise base. So again, so I think we have also been, we have had cards, 2 decades of cards in the market, right? I mean, different international card schemes have offered debit cards, but they have not used those for payments. So when we look at the numbers from central bank, we see we have about 90,000 plus point of sales terminals deployed across the country. But when we look at the number of transactions happening on these point of sales terminals using cards, we found that we have roughly about 2 million credit cards in the market. Total transactions using cards on these terminals have been average has been less than 4 a day per terminal. So what it really means is, if you go to a supermarket, there are hundreds of transactions happening, but there are hundreds of businesses, there's 0 transactions. So people are not really using these cards, right? So that, so even we have had cards, people have not been using, right? So, but if you are to move cashless, we need to get them to start using. So that is where, just say these are the benefits and moving cashless, is a good thing to say. How practical is it to get them to move? So moving cashless, we have had another problem because one of the things, when we look at the cards, the card business in the country, the banks have been charging almost 3 to 3.5% of a commission from a business. If a customer goes and uses a card, banks will charge 3% of commission from that transaction. So what actually happens is, when you look at a small to medium enterprise, sometimes the profit that they make out of a good is 5%. So out of that, are they willing to partake 3% to a bank as commission? So it's a deal breaker. So what actually happens is, if you go to a small shop, maybe outside Colombo, and try to use a card, they say, we have to charge that 3% from the customer. So which means if you pay with a card, they'll charge 3% extra, but if you pay with cash, you get at a lower price. So obviously the customer is not going to use a card in that scenario. So because of that, there's a showstopper saying somebody to use a card, even the business has a terminal, the merchant or the shop owner is not willing to accept a card unless that commission is paid. So one of the way to resolve this was to actually reduce that percentage. So that's where we actually introduced what we call a national card scheme, where we brought the commission to 1%. Right? And even in the mobile payments, we actually reduced that commission to 1%, or sometimes in the case of 0.5%. Right? So these are some of the things we had to do, because we had to get the merchants to accept. Even if the customer has a card, if the merchant is not accepting a card payment or a digital payment, then it's a showstopper. Another area of actually moving towards a cashless economy was actually a cycle breakdown. Right? For example, we would like to pay, use Pick Me or Uber, let's say to go in a 3-wheeler, and we would probably like to make a payment using the same mobile phone rather than having to go to ATM and withdraw cash and do that. But the problem for the 3-wheeler guy was, end of the day, when he wants to buy vegetables or buy petrol, he needed cash, because all these guys were not accepting card payments or digital payments. So he had to go end of the day to a 3-wheeler and withdraw cash and do that. So that's a cycle breaker, right? So because of that, sometimes most of the people have experience when you are using Pick Me and Uber. If you try to pay with a card, they cancel the ride because they need cash, right? So the solution to this is, even the lady who sells vegetables at the Sunday fair, unless we get them into digital and the 3-wheeler guy can also use his smartphone to make a payment, the cycle breaks down. So always the cash will come forward, and we are not going to. So that is where we had to get them onto digital. So that is where we actually introduced what we call LankaQR. Basically, it's a sticker at the vendor. So customer who has a smartphone can just scan and pay. So we had to actually solve this problem end to end, because just by solving one problem by using a technology, it's not going to get deployed across the country. So these are some of the problems that we had to solve in moving towards the cashless economy. So when a country is trying to move towards digital economy or cashless society, we need to solve some of these issues, otherwise we'll just stop somewhere and it doesn't move beyond that. So that is what has happened traditionally over the past. So these are some of the issues that we have been resolving by introducing different types of solutions and trying to solve the entire problem rather than just solving one problem and think that everything is okay.
Thank you, Mr. De Silva, for giving us that insightful take on the adaptability of digital economy. Now, Mr. De Silva, I'm pretty sure you have heard about the phrase, every cloud has a silver lining. The COVID-19 pandemic has completely shifted the Sri Lankan financial landscape to a non-traditional channel to cater to the situation. According to you, what are the non-traditional channels that has emerged in this context?
Yeah, so I think I talked about it previously also. So the traditional channel has been checks and cash in historically, right? So people, I mean, we have been a cash-rich country. I mean, people. So the non-traditional channels have been moving digital, especially accessing services to smartphones. I think those are the key, and also cards have been there for, as I said, about 2 decades. So we have seen adoption of using cards for payments. So I mean, technically in Sri Lanka we can say it's non-traditional, but worldwide, if you really look at, I mean, if you look at countries like China, I mean, more than 90% of the transactions are using mobiles, right? Especially thanks to Alipay and WeChat and that type of technologies. So what COVID-19 did was, I think the challenge, as I said, the problem for us was we had technology. I mean, banks have deployed different internet banking, mobile banking technologies, but the usage was very low. But what COVID-19 did was, I mean, I think it's definitely, maybe less than 1% benefits out of COVID that came was digital, adoption of digital, because obviously what actually happens is when people are put into a situation where they don't have a choice, they have to adapt. So that's what really happened. When there was 3 months of curfew where they couldn't go out of the house, they couldn't go to an ATM or a bank to get cash. But they had to live, they had to buy, they had to eat. So for that you need cash. So how do you get cash when there's curfew, when you can't even go to a bank? So the only option left for them was digital. If they could transact, because they had money in a bank, majority of them, at least people who are employed, had money in the bank, and if they had access to their bank account, they could make a payment and maybe get things delivered, or when somebody brings to your house, can use it if you don't even have cash. So when people are put into that kind of scenario where there is no other choice. We saw this happening in India, right? Several years ago, Indian government brought in a policy called demonetization. So what they did was they took the cash out. Government took the cash out of the market, right? A large portion of cash out. So people struggled. So for them, the only option was moving digital. So we saw a huge surge in digital adoption. Organizations like Paytm saw numbers, sort of going through the roof. So that's what COVID did. So COVID basically, as I said, we have been a cash-rich country. When COVID came in early 2020, people had no other choice. So they didn't have a choice to get cash. So they had to move. And fortunately for us, we had the technology in terms of platforms enabled, I mean, by LankaClear as well as the banks, for people to access their finances in a bank digitally, right? And also, we also saw the merchants, small merchants who were only willing to deal with cash, they also didn't have a choice with the goods. So the only way for them is to get the money into the bank account through digitally. So we saw them adopting, I mean, the LankaQRs that we have introduced, or we introduced another payment mode called Just Pay, which is basically using a smartphone to transfer money from customer's account to a merchant's account in real time, right? And we saw adoption, sort of even internet banking and mobile banking was, the numbers were very low prior to COVID. We started seeing people now paying their bills, right? I mean, we are very familiar to people going to a food city or a kiosk and staying in line to pay a mobile bill. I mean, we have seen that happening through cash, right? And even though they have carry a smartphone in their hand, they still go to this thing. But during COVID, they can't do that. They couldn't. So they had to adopt. So we saw that shift happening. And I think that's where, I think the silver lining you're talking about, which basically gave people a reason to use. because when they had no choice. So I think fortunately we had the technologies available for people to use. So that's why we saw this adoption, and the good thing about this is generally if somebody is reluctant to use a service, it's very difficult to get them to use that. But at least if they start using it once, then they start seeing the benefit, the convenience, then they will continue to use it. So that's the shift I think we are seeing. So we are seeing that shift. We have seen that, but there's still a long way to go. From an overall perspective, but I think we have turned that corner, if you will, and we are seeing a lot of people now even our parents or grandparents start using smartphones and digital services, right? So which would have never happened probably if not for COVID, right? So we are seeing that happening.
Basically, COVID acted as a promoter.
Absolutely. COVID basically, put people into a situation where they had to act, and that digital provided that path for them to act. So I think that was the real reason. I think now we are seeing actually a surge in some of these transactions happening.
So there are advantages.
Absolutely.
So Mr. De Silva, now in this environment we are living in, it's highly uncertain and it's volatile. So change is vital for survival. What do you see as the limitations for change for the cashless digital economy?
So I think the primary limitation has been lack of awareness of the sort of the benefits and the benefits that it would bring. So I think again I previously addressed COVID sort of provided that push for people to start using, but also I think it's a entire cycle. We had to bring this entire cycle into the whole ecosystem, because if you don't bring this entire cycle into the whole digital ecosystem, there are places where it breaks down. So we have to address those, right? So now one of the problems that we are seeing is we have been starting deploying this LankaQR, right? So over 2 decades of cards in the market, we have only deployed 90,000 plus point of sale terminals. So there were some inherent problems, because point of sale terminal cost about 50,000 or 60,000 rupees, and the merchant has to bear that cost. So especially the small timers, they couldn't afford this cyber caddies and the petty caddies, they couldn't afford a terminal, right? But now the LankaQR is just a sticker, there's no cost, right? So we saw over the last year or year and a half, now we have more than 300,000 shops having LankaQR code, right? So which really which really addressed a problem that was there, and we see a fair bit of people, even people who are using traveling in buses carrying smartphones, right? So the other challenge what we have seen is in most countries we have seen people adopting digital, especially cards and others, in public transport. That has been some of the first implementations in other countries. But in Sri Lanka, even as of now, it's all cash, right? You go in a bus or you go in a train, very few, there's online payments for trains, but if you go in a public transport, whether it's private bus or a CTB or even a train, railway, it's all cash. So that's where actually we brought in a concept called National Transport Card, right, or Sri Lanka Transit Card, where a lot of people may not know, the conductor carries a ticket machine. You have seen, you give cash, they print a ticket, but that's actually a POS terminal, right? So all they did was they took cash and printed a receipt, right? But it had the capability of accepting a card which never was implemented before, right? So that's where we actually, with the support of Central Bank and Transport Ministry, we have just introduced a card as a pilot to highway, where People's Bank was the first bank to do that. So now we have actually introduced basically a debit or a card that is issued by the bank. You can just do a tap in that terminals, right, and make a payment, small payments, right? 20 rupees, 30 rupees, whatever the bus fare is. So that is actually the technologies we have brought in, right? So most of the cards that will be issued in the market will support this in the future, right, by all the banks. So whether you go and withdraw money from ATM, or whether you go and pay to a grocery shop or a supermarket, or even public transport, now you can actually, I mean, you don't even need to carry season tickets. Actually, the card can have that functionality. A parent can give card to a child who's sort of schooling, for example, as a season ticket, and this will be a digital payment card where they can actually do a tap and make a payment to a transport, right? So these things are really will drive adoption in that. So even the technology that we are using now, for example, some of the problems that we saw, that we have found solutions, especially when you are making a payment to a government department. Now, for example, a lot of traders in the market, they need to clear goods from customs. But previously what happened was they had to physically visit a Bank of Ceylon or People's Bank, State Bank, and give money and get a pay order, take that pay order to customs to clear the goods, and this was a long process. Now we have actually implemented digital payments to customs. So all you need to do is, even from home or office, you just log into your internet banking, select customs, and real time the data is provided, and you just make the payment, and the payment get credited to Sri Lanka Customs in real time, and a receipt digitally, electronically provided to your internet banking. You can either take a printout, or using your smartphone, you can go to customs and clear the goods on a Sunday, right? Which was previously not available. So now you can pay your taxes online. Sri Lanka Ports Authority, paying payments to Ports Authority, BOI, EPF, and several other departments are import-export control, and that is moving there. So another actually challenge and problem that we saw in the market was the documentation. Now, for example, we solved the problem to customs in making electronic payment, but you have ton of documents that you need to clear some goods, and those were still physical. Somebody had to carry that and do that. So that's where we actually introduced digital signatures, right? So that is what actually happens is we introduce a service called LankaSign, where you can just create anyway, all these documents are created through computers now, right? I mean, through Word or something, and then simply they take a printout, somebody signs, and you carry the documents. I mean, that's been the traditional way of doing that. But now when we introduce digital signatures, basically very simply you save that file as a PDF file, and then you attach your digital signature, and then you just send it either email, or I mean, for customs they have Asikuda system, you can just upload the files, right? So this actually solves a huge problem of documentation. One is waste of money and time on paper and other manual processes, but now you can submit all those documents. So we have now started introducing in most government departments, right? One side accepting digital payments and also submitting all these services. So somebody from Anuradhapura, Polonnaru, or Trincomalee doesn't have to come to Colombo to submit all these documents. Previously they had to travel. Sometimes the office is closed when they are coming into Colombo, right? But here, from wherever they are, if the department allows digitally signed documents, you can submit them from wherever they are. And the good thing is, in 2006, Sri Lanka passed a regulation called Electronic Transactions Act, where digital signatures were enabled to be accepted in a court of law in case of a dispute. So now, without any problem, people can submit digitally signed documents, and that will be a valid legal document, just like your physical signature. Actually, it's much better than physical signature, because physical signature can be forged. And I can put your signature and send that as you, right? But in digital signature, that signature that you put is linked to you. So you can't deny, we call non-repudiation, that I'm the one who signed. I can't deny if I put my digital signature in a document that I didn't sign. But in a physical sense, I can say, no, I didn't sign, it's somebody else forged mine. So you can't do that. So there are technological solutions which are addressing some of the problems that we couldn't address on a manual system through digital signatures as well. So I think we have got the entire ecosystem in terms of technology into place. It's now a matter of actually people starting implementing this, especially in government departments and private sector. For example, if when you open a bank account, right? I mean, how many documents that you have to submit, right? Physically, all these photocopies and all these things, right? And you have to physically visit. Now we are slowly getting them adopting digitally signed documents, accepting electronically. You can either email or upload through a portal, right? So these things have to come in, because if you don't bring all these in, people will move back to manual, because only 10% we have enabled digital and 90% are manual, right? So unless we bring some of these other components also in, people will not really see a benefit. So if you don't see a benefit, you go back to your old habit, right? So if you are to break a habit, you have to bring that entire chain. So that's what really we have been doing in terms of automating that entire chain, rather than just automating one piece and feel that people will adopt.
Thank you, Mr. Silva, for sharing that with us. And finally, we now understand that it is the vision of LankaClear to be Asia's most trusted and reliable payment network. Can you enlighten us on that roadmap to achieve this?
Yes, so I think when we look at some of the services that we have introduced, now for example, I said automating check clearance. We were the second in the world to implement behind Singapore, Sri Lanka in 2006, right? And that's a even automating slips was first in South Asia, right? Some of these services. We have introduced these services, way ahead of the curve in terms of if you really look at other countries, especially in the region. But our next challenge is also how do we bring some of these, foreign exchange into the country at a much lower cost, right? So that is where we have initiated some of that. Now, for example, very recently we introduced an app called LankaRemit, right? So previously, most of these, our migrant workers, so actually migrant worker remittance was the highest foreign exchange earner for Sri Lanka. I mean, prior to this COVID, and people lost jobs. So, but how do we bring that in? So one of the few challenges for them was some of the access channels as well as the cost associated with the transfer. So that's where we actually introduced an app actually that was an initiative from Central Bank. We implemented the solution where you can download and install that app, and you can basically find the best channel to send the money. What is the most cost-effective way of sending? So previously you sent through one channel, and that may be costly, but you may not have been aware. So what this app will do is, if you are in a particular location outside Sri Lanka, it will show you what are the nearest points or operators that are close to you, money transfer operators, and then it will also show which, if you go with which party, that will get you the best deal in terms of sending foreign exchange, right? So in that sense also, once you actually do a transfer through that, it will provide a tracking number, and then through the tracking number you can see where the money is now. So when the money comes into local bank account, it will actually basically, you can, through the app, you can find out that. So that's another service to help people. And also we have introduced bill payments for people outside to, for example, if the parents are there, children are overseas, they can actually make bill payments of local people through the app. So there are different types of services. Then the other part is also, we are in terms of linking with foreign networks. We are working with actually a network called Asia Payment Network, where there are 11 countries connected in a hub and 13 payment networks. So once we connect that, we are in the process of connecting, we will have easy access to all these 11 countries, and the fund transfers from those, vice versa, from us to them and them to us, can be done at a much lower cost, right? So hopefully we are hoping that people will start using these channels. We are in terms of linking with the India National Payment Corporation, which is a similar entity, so that the cards that we offer will be accepted at a in India, as well as the cards that are issued like RuPay cards in India will be accepted in Sri Lanka. Then we are also we are linked to Japan Credit Bureau, which is basically the card that we introduced. Is basically technology. We have a technology partnership with JCB International, basically to provide the EMV technology, and this card is acceptable outside Sri Lanka as well, right? And also, I think the biggest benefit that we are bringing in with all these international partnerships, plus also the technology that we are offering. Now, if you really look at in a Sri Lankan context, most people do transaction locally, right? For example, 98% of the transaction that you do locally. For example, you go to a supermarket and buy something, you pay with a card or digital, right? That transaction, the money has to go from your bank to that organization's account, right? But when you are using international cards, always the transaction happens internationally, and we are paying dollars for every transaction, even though the transaction is between two local banks. So for that, we are losing more than 10 billion in foreign exchange when we are using international cards. So that's also one of the reasons why we introduced this card, where 0 rupees will go for local transactions outside the country. So we are hard-earned foreign exchange can also be retained because of our partnership, but because of our partnership, also the same card can be used through the JCB network internationally. So these are some of the values that we are bringing in terms of our international, so that as an economy, as a country, we will also start seeing these digital transactions happening. And also, even our digital signatures, we are going through a process called Web Trust certification. It's an international certification. Once that is done, these digital signatures can be used with outside Sri Lankan parties as well. So for example, the traders want to sign international contract with other parties, they can use digital signatures issued in Sri Lanka for that purpose. So in that sense, our footprint will be sort of worldwide by all these partnerships, and by doing that we are actually trying to bring much more benefits to the country. And also I think the vital part is how much of foreign exchange can we save for the country, which is earned very with difficulty by people, even outside parties sending, plus also exporters doing that. But if we are, whatever foreign exchange that we earn, if it goes back out of the country because we are consuming some of these services, then we are sort of losing that advantage. So that's what all these different partnerships that we are trying to bring in to save valuable foreign exchange to the country by actually providing local expertise and local technology solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you very much, Mr. De Silva, once again for walking us through that future journey of LankaClear. But unfortunately, we have reached the end of today's episode, but now we would like to take this opportunity to thank you for allocating time for us from your busy schedule and presenting us wise words that has helped us to magnify our cause and make this project a success. On behalf of Royal College, I would like to wish you the best of luck for your future endeavors and hope to meet you soon again.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's always a pleasure actually talking to you. Thank you.